August 1944. The outskirts of a strategically vital French city. Dust rises from the tracks of idling American tanks as engines idle under a punishing summer sun. The enemy is pulling out. A retreating German garrison moves exposed along the northern highways, an open target for a swift armored thrust. But a sudden order freezes the American tracks in place. A French infantry division, attached to the Allied force, blocks the main advance. Their commander delivers a rigid, unyielding ultimatum. France must enter the city first, alone, on camera, or the entire French force ceases cooperation immediately. The French troops are 6 hours away. Waiting means the German garrison escapes to fight another day. General George S. Patton receives the non-negotiable demand at his forward command post. His response will brilliantly exploit the division between empty political theater and hard tactical warfare. This is the story of an American general who refused to let political vanity compromise a critical battlefield victory. Before we continue, make sure you subscribe. We tell the World War II stories that show the truth behind the myths of military glory. Sergeant Thomas Miller was 24 years old. He came from the steel town of Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, and belonged to the 3rd Army, 4th Armored Division. Before the war, he worked the open hearth furnaces, a brutal job that taught him how to endure intense heat and heavy pressure. He enlisted the day after Pearl Harbor because his younger brother had gone missing at sea, and he wanted to finish the fight as quickly as possible. He had driven his Sherman tank through the hedgerows of Normandy, lost his best friend to an 88mm shell at St. Lo, and carried a jagged piece of shrapnel in his left shoulder. He did not care about headlines or medals. He cared about ending the war and keeping his remaining men alive. Now, he sat in the turret of his idling tank on the dusty northern ridge, watching the German garrison flee through his binoculars, completely blocked from advancing by an empty stretch of road. General de Brigade Marcel Lefebvre was 50 years old, born to a wealthy aristocratic family in Bordeaux, and commanded the Free French Infantry Division, attached to the Allied force. He believed with absolute, unyielding certainty that the restoration of French dignity surpassed all tactical considerations on the battlefield. His personal philosophy was simple, often repeated to his staff, that France must wash away the humiliation of 1940 in the blood of its own battlefields, and no foreign power could be allowed to steal the glory of her liberation. He wore a pristine, custom-tailored uniform with polished brass buttons, rode in a spotless staff car, and kept a pair of gleaming riding boots that had never touched the mud of the trenches. He held a direct communication line to Charles de Gaulle's headquarters, giving him an unearned political leverage that he used like a weapon against his military superiors. He stood by his vehicle 3 miles back, refusing to move his stalled infantry forward while his strict conditions remained unmet. By August 1944, the Allied advance across Western Europe had broken into a frantic, sprawling race toward the German border. The rapid breakout from the Normandy beachheads had shattered the German front lines, turning their organized defense into a chaotic, desperate retreat. General Patton's 3rd Army was moving faster than military doctrine thought possible, tearing through the countryside and trapping enemy units before they could establish new defensive positions. This blistering pace created severe logistical headaches, with fuel pipelines stretched to the breaking point and supply lines running dangerously thin. In the middle of this chaos, political considerations began to collide heavily with tactical decisions on the front lines. The Supreme Command often felt immense pressure to balance the strategic needs of the battlefield with the fragile egos of the multinational alliance. In multiple sectors, British, American, and French forces fought under a unified command structure, but they did not always share the same immediate priorities. Many senior officers frequently let minor political disputes slide to maintain a superficial appearance of total harmony among the Allies. They allowed ceremonial delays and symbolic gestures to slow down operations prioritizing national pride over immediate battlefield results. This tolerance created a dangerous precedent where coalition politics could stall an active pursuit, leaving frontline soldiers to watch the enemy slip away. The situation on the outskirts of the city was the direct result of this unchecked leniency, as symbolic victory threatened to override a major tactical victory. The dust on the northern ridge continued to settle as the idle American armor waited for an answer from the rear. Captain Robert Vance, a 32-year-old liaison officer from Richmond, Virginia, serving with the 4th Armored Division, stood beside the pristine staff car. He held a map case in his dusty hand. He looked at the older French commander. "General, my armor is positioned on the northern ridge," Vance said. "The German garrison is actively retreating from the eastern gates right now. If we do not send the tanks into the streets immediately, the entire enemy force will escape across the river." General Lefebvre did not look up from his silver pocket watch. He adjusted his silk scarf. "The division under my command will advance when the scheduled hour arrives," Lefebvre said. "Not one moment before, sir." "The enemy is not waiting for a schedule," Vance said. "They are fleeing. My men can secure the intersections in 20 minutes and cut off their trucks. We need to open the southern road for your infantry, but we must strike from the north now. It is a matter of national honor," Lefebvre said. "French boots must be the very first to touch the pavement of the city center. France liberates France. If your American tanks enter the city before my men arrive, I will halt my entire division. We will simply refuse to cooperate with your army." "General, this is a direct tactical opportunity," Vance said. "General Patton's orders are to destroy the enemy forces wherever we find them. Political symbols will not stop those German divisions from digging into the next tree line and killing more of our men next week." "Your General Patton fights for headlines in newspapers," Lefebvre said. "I fight for the eternal soul of an occupied nation. My troops are currently 6 hours behind because of the bridge crossings. You will hold your armor on that ridge until we arrive to lead the parade. France enters first, or France does not cooperate." Vance stared at the immaculate uniform of the French general. He knew the argument was finished. He knew he could not change the mind of a man who looked at a battlefield and saw only a camera lens. "I will inform command of your position," Vance said. He turned on his heel and walked back to his radio jeep. The report reached Patton within the hour. Patton arrived within the hour. His open-topped jeep pulled up to the stone farmhouse, kicking up a thick cloud of yellow dust that settled over the immaculate staff car parked outside. The 4 stars on his helmet caught the sharp afternoon light, and the ivory grips of his revolvers rested against his hips as he stepped onto the gravel. Every soldier in the courtyard straightened instantly, their eyes locked on the lean, rigid figure of the army commander. He walked into the dimly lit command room unannounced, his boots striking the floorboards with a slow, deliberate rhythm. The room fell completely silent. He did not raise his voice, but the cold intensity of his presence filled the space instantly. Patton studied Lefebvre for a moment. "General, is it true you have ordered your infantry division to halt 3 miles south of the city limits?" Patton asked. "It is true," Lefebvre said, adjusting his collar. "And you have stated that your division will refuse to cooperate in this offensive unless they are permitted to enter the streets before any American vehicles?" Patton asked. "That is correct," Lefebvre said. "It is an absolute requirement of my government." "So you are prepared to let a retreating German garrison escape across the river because of a photographic layout?" Patton asked. "Our national honor cannot be bargained away for a minor tactical delay," Lefebvre said. Patton stepped closer, his voice dropping into a quiet, frozen rasp. "You talk about honor as if it belongs on a billboard, General. You stand here in a dry room with polished leather boots, calculating the political value of a parade route, while the enemy slips through our fingers. France has been occupied for 4 years, and I understand the hunger to see your own flags flying in the town square. A nation needs an image to heal its pride." But pride does not kill German soldiers, and it does not stop them from killing my men next week. Your soldiers see a map, but my people see a resurrection, and that requires a specific picture for the world to witness. Then we will give the world its picture, but we will not give the Germans their escape. Your infantry will enter the city from the south along the main boulevard. You will have the ceremonial route, the cameras, and the cheering crowds. My armor will strike from the north and the east along the tactical routes, cutting off the retreat before they reach the bridges. Your men will enter through the triumphal gates, and my men will block the exits. France liberates the city. America wins the battle, and both are true. Lefebvre stared at the table, his hand hovering over his pocket watch as he calculated the offer. You have 10 seconds to agree to this deployment, General Patton said. Otherwise, I will bypass your sector entirely, strip your division of its fuel rations, and leave you to explain to your superiors why French troops stood still while Americans finished the war without them. Lefebvre tightened his jaw, looked at the map, and nodded slowly. The orders went out over the radio nets instantly, sending the heavy Sherman tanks of the 4th Armored Division roaring into motion toward the northern and eastern outskirts of the city. Sergeant Miller did not look back at the Grand Southern Highway, where the French Infantry Division was just beginning its slow, meticulous approach toward the main gates. Through his vision slit, Miller saw the dust clouds of the fleeing German garrison, their open trucks and horse-drawn supply wagons, jammed into a frantic bottleneck along the rear river roads. The American tanks hit the escaping column with sudden, devastating force, blocking the stone bridges and sealing the exits before a single enemy company could cross to safety. The roar of 37mm guns and the rattling of heavy machine guns filled the narrow streets as the pocket was closed tight. 3 miles to the south, the pristine staff car of General Lefebvre rolled past cheering crowds and flashing cameras, the French soldiers marching down the main boulevard under a shower of flowers. The French public saw the carefully staged photograph of a triumphant national liberation on the front pages of the morning newspapers. But behind the main square, in the smoke and debris of the rear alleys, American soldiers quietly disarmed 400 dazed German prisoners and secured the tactical victory Patton had refused to sacrifice. Sergeant Thomas Miller returned to Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. After the German surrender, his left shoulder stiff from the winter cold and his ears still ringing with the echo of tank treads, he went back to the open hearth furnaces of the Bethlehem Steel Corporation, working 40 more years in the heat to support a family of 4 children. He kept a single piece of a broken camera lens he had picked up from the Southern Boulevard in his dresser drawer, never speaking about the details of that afternoon to his neighbors or his Union buddies. He died quietly in his sleep in 1988, remembered by his grandchildren only as a silent man who hated parades. General de Brigade Marcel Lefebvre survived the conflict to see his name printed in the official histories of the liberation, his crisp uniform preserved in a municipal archive for future generations to admire. He retired from military service in 1955, spending his remaining years writing long, bitter memoirs about the lack of respect American commanders showed to European traditions. He passed away at his family estate near Bordeaux in 1974. Convinced until his final breath that the image of the soldier mattered far more than the blood spilled to put him there, General Patton never recorded the details of his confrontation with Lefebvre in his personal diary, leaving only a brief, single-line note in an operational summary sent to his staff officers. He wrote that vanity is an expensive luxury on a fluid front, and a commander must always look past the grand entryway to see who is guarding the back door. Some historians have argued that Patton's decision was a masterful compromise, a rare display of tactical flexibility that preserved a fragile international alliance while securing a critical victory on the ground. They claim that bypassing the French demands completely would have created a severe political crisis for the Supreme Command, potentially disrupting future joint operations during the drive into Central Europe. Others have argued the opposite, suggesting that by indulging the theatrical vanity of a foreign general, Patton set a dangerous precedent that placed symbolic appearances on a level with military necessity. What is certain is that the 400 German soldiers captured at the rear exits were permanently removed from the war, unable to retreat, regroup, or cause more casualties to the advancing Allied forces. If you had been in Patton's position, would you have done the same, or would you have delayed the entire operation to preserve the political unity of the High Command? Let us know in the comments. And if you want more stories about the truth behind the myths of military glory, make sure to subscribe.